Hello and welcome again to another episode of Battle Ready.
Ready.
And today we're going to talk about the saying it's an unmitigated travesty might be a bit harsh, but what's going on with Dawnbringers?
What is going on?
Story-wise, we're not going to touch on that too much. But what is going on with the release? So at the time of recording, it still has not even been announced for pre-order.
Dawnbringer 6.
Dawnbringer 6. I have to think that it's going to be announced this weekend. And I'll try to put this video up this coming Monday. So hopefully as you watch this, it was just announced yesterday.
In that case, we are happy.
Well, even then, 2-week pre-order period.
So it's going to be like, you can get it like a week.
You're going to be able to get it like 2 weeks before the game, the 4th edition drops. Yeah. So you're buying this $50 book and all the rules and regiments of renown and all that sort of stuff.
It's going to be gone 2 weeks later.
Yeah, it's valid for 2 weeks.
Watch they put Dawnbringer 6 out at 4th edition.
Yeah,
That's what it looks like.
I wouldn't put it past them. And you have to think that this was not the intent. You have to think that this was delayed because one, this just makes no sense. But two, leading up to each of the other books were several short stories. Every Friday there was a little short story on Warhammer Community. And those have stopped. There haven't been a short story in several weeks. Which means they ran out of content. They wanted to publish it way back when, and then they ran out of stuff. So that's like now in the world, right? There's shipping crises, there's inflation, there's all kinds of business stuff. So maybe those delays were unavoidable, but it's not a good look. And I think there are two major failings when it comes to the Dawnbringer Crusades. One is narrative. I think the story has a major failing. And one is just the way they produce them, I think, because I don't have a good word for that. But the way they produce them is a major failing.
Production?
The way they produce them.
Right.
I just said the same thing again. Your way was great. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Narrative.
All right, the narrative. So without going into detail, this isn't a recap. And certainly there's no spoilers if you're waiting on that. This is spoiler free.
I have nothing to add.
Well, you will, because the narrative in general is about these two Dawnbringer Crusades.
Yeah, I remember that much.
But it's all the action, all the story is very localized.
Yeah. So
it's this group, and they go off and they fight some cruel boys. No, they fight some, what do they call it? OBR. And then, they find Usharan. But it's all very small. The ramifications are very small. Whether or not this particular group lives or dies is important to those people, obviously, and the leaders in the story, but it doesn't have realm-shaking consequences.
Like Broken Realms. Like
Broken Realms, exactly. In Broken Realms, it's like the Teclis is fighting Nagash.
Or probably spoiled.
Yeah, maybe. There's a siege of Excelsis, and Excelsis almost gets wiped out. And then there's the cursed skies that completely change how the Stormcast have to operate. And Be'lakor comes back. And there are big movers and shakers. Big, big, big events. And it's like, wow, the mortal realms are really changing here. And in Dawnbringers, you sort of get the sense that some tribe living in the Great Parch somewhere, has no idea and doesn't even care. It has no impact on them whatsoever.
Book 6 is going to watch Book 6 be massive, awesome.
Maybe Book 6 comes out and totally revamps that, for sure.
Usharan kills Nagash. Sigmar is a model now.
Right, you never know. But at least so far, in Broken Realms, Marathi's becoming a god, right? All this stuff is going on. There's these alliances and treaties being made between Be'lakor and Lady Olinder, or between Marathi and the Deepkin. There's a lot of moving and shaking. Is it Anvilgard?
Yeah, it's Anvilgard.
Anvilgard gets taken over and becomes the Daughters of Cain city. There's just crazy stuff going on. And in Dawnbringers, it's like, oh yeah, they left and they fought some people. It's really been a shame. It's hard to see how they become, how this is going to affect the greater world. The stories themselves might be great. You know, I'm not saying they're good or bad. If they were a novel, you know, if they were a Black Library book, maybe that'd be great. But when it comes to a narrative that we can all be part of, I don't know. It sounds like these dudes over here are doing some stuff, and it doesn't really affect my dudes, right? It's not really affecting me on the tabletop so much. Plus, we know that 4th edition starts with the Vermin Doom, where basically a piece of Blight City pops up right outside of Hammerhall, right? Or at least a city. And
I think it is Hammerhall.
I think it is Hammerhall.
I think it's Action.
I think it is. But that's a big thing, right? That's a big challenge. That's a big struggle. That's something that's going to impact every other alliance, right? Fyreslayers, they live in Actually. They're going to have something to say about that, right? Skaven are all over the place. You got, what is this big breach by a sort of 5th member of the Chaos Godhood?
Yeah.
What does that do for the great game? Right? It's like, there's so many questions that raises, just like in Broken Realms. How are people going to react? Turns out the answer to that is they're not. No one cares. So although I'm complaining about there being no big events, in Broken Realms there are a lot of big events, and then none of it mattered. So there's that. But I just feel like, whatever happens to these Dawnbringers, what Caradron person's going to care? What Seraphon person cares? Is there even one Tzeentch person that cares? Tzeentch. I guess there's one that's mentioned in the story. But it's like nobody cares. It doesn't impact the alliances. It doesn't impact the other races. It might be cool for cities, right? Because Cities of Sigmar, that faction is, they've got starring roles here. But if there's a number of other factions where you're like, what are they doing? I don't know. Whatever. So that's pretty bad. I do think, though, that, whether the story is good or bad, I think when we're talking about these narrative building things, they should be things that at least every faction cares about on some level. They've got some sort of stake in it. Not every faction has to be a main character, and I don't think you could do that. But every faction should have a reason to care about what's going on. And I feel like a lot of them don't in Dawnbringers. A lot of them don't. I think Flesh Eater Courts is in there a lot. I think Cities, obviously. Couple others, Bone Reapers. But overall, it's like most factions don't care.
There's only like 4 factions that care.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a minority. It might be more than 4, but it's certainly a minority. So I think when they do these narrative things that should be advancing the whole idea of the mortal realms.
Whole idea.
Right? We should have Broken Realms level events that really every single faction can look at and react to.
Yeah.
Say, oh, how are Seraphon dealing with this? Oh, how are the Ogre Ma tribes dealing with this? Eating it, obviously, right?
New food!
How are, every single faction, how are the Nurgles like taking advantage of this, right? Everything should have a reaction. And if the events are so small that they don't even care, then it's not worth your narrative campaign. That's a Black Library book. Could be a cool story, see cool interactions, dive deep into a faction or two, but don't make that your narrative campaign. All right. Thoughts on that?
I think we did it.
All right. So
now the
production.
Yes. Prosecution.
So this is what GW has done. They do this in 40K. They did it in Broken Realms. They did it in what was it called? Malign Portents, the one that came before 2nd edition.
Yeah, Malign
Portents. Very nice. But right before an edition change, they'll put out, like, over the last 8 months, year maybe, they put out a series of narrative books to sort of lead into the next edition. And
all kinds of hand gestures.
I can see that.
Looks so awesome.
No, I don't think it does.
Oh, dang.
But they do all that to sort of lead up into the next edition, right? And I think it's bad. I think that, because especially when you look at Dawnbringers, not only do they have the stories, but they also have, like, a lot of rules. There's these regiments of renown that you can play, and they have rules for multiplayer games. Like, well, why did we have to wait till the edition's almost over, till the rules are almost invalid to get multiplayer rules? Why did we have to wait all the way till now to get siege rules, good siege rules? Why did we have to wait until now to get Triumph and Treachery? So what is happening? Why don't these things coming out more regularly? I feel like instead of loading all the stuff up at the end of the edition,
spread it out.
Spread it out.
Through the middle of the edition where nothing happens.
No, like every 6 months, right? You have a little narrative supplement. And it can come out and have a little bit of the story that moves the narrative forward. Maybe it has some rules for multiplayer.
Maybe put it in with the GHB.
Or the Chronicler's Tome. That's right. Yeah, you can do that.
That's every week.
You have the Chronicler's Tome, come up with a couple of battle plans, a couple narrative battle plans to support Path to Glory, come out with some lore, come out with, oh, and by the way, here's the multiplayer mode. It's not something that you necessarily need to, finally balance and say, okay, points for the regular gamer or match player here, points for the multiplayer mode here. We recognize that when you play multiplayer, there's just going to have to be some compromises made. But give us those rules so that we can play them for a couple of years before the edition changes. Not right before the edition changes. Not right before they become invalid and we have a totally new edition where the things we don't even have the same stats, right? We've got control now, not bravery.
Yeah.
Right? And then 6 months later, you advance the story a little bit more. And then 6 months later, you advance the story a little bit more. And then if you want to have a lead up, then maybe you can do 2 or 3 books right at the end to show the next big development. But I feel like, speaking of Broken Realms, even though I liked those books and I liked those stories, one of the things that was really a bummer about it is you had all these big events. You're like, wow, all these big changes in the skies and Excelsis and Kragnos and all this stuff. And then when 3rd edition started, no one cared. What does it mean that Morathi took over Anvil Guard? Nothing. That doesn't have any effect. What does it mean that Kragnos was banished and now he's raring to go again?
He just blew up the Dreadsman Fortress.
It means nothing. It means nothing. What does it mean that, it's like with the broken skies and now the Stormcast can't get back?
They just make Thunderstrike.
It's fine. It's like, that's all fine. So rather than doing that, you could set up all these things and then maybe the first 2 supplements are how the different factions overcome or resolve or are challenged by, right? And you could say, all right, we don't want Kragnos to be a thing the whole edition, so maybe the first 2 stories have a thread where he wants to go back to Excelsis and Smash, but instead he goes to the Dreadspine Fortress and it's a bigger fight. He's like all about it now because, they found some sightings of his ancient people, and so he's there now. So you could do that, but you could provide a narrative hook, and you could do that slowly over the course of the edition, so you don't feel as a player like everything's just stagnant. Yeah, it really felt bad for much of 3rd edition, where nothing was happening, nothing big was happening, and then for Dawnbringers to come in and still nothing big happens, it's a pretty big disappointment. But yeah, I would like to see them spread out. What do you think of that?
That would be better.
Yeah.
Because with 6 books at the end, if someone joins in late 3rd edition, like we did late 2nd, they go like, oh, everything's happening. Oh. No.
Yeah, that was one bad thing. We joined very late in 2nd edition.
Like 3 months.
No, it was longer than that. We joined in September the year before. So we had about 9 months. So just as we were getting involved, the Broken Realms books start coming out. Wow. And so it's like, wow, this world is really evolving. This is so cool. Look at everything.
Oh, wait.
And then we get into 3rd edition and they're like, oh, yeah, no, we're not going to do any more of that. Not for another couple of years.
Oh, wait, this is how it's always been.
Yeah. So that is true. It does set poor expectations. But I also think you could have, like I said, you could have a couple books at the end, especially if you want to get a little experimental. You're like, ooh, we really want to introduce these regiments. We really want to introduce these rules. But we think they're going to sort of be unbalanced, so we don't want to really go crazy with them. Mm-hmm. Well, then, okay, add them in the last 3 months, right? Okay, all right, I get it. But overall, for most of the stuff, it really should just be moving the story along. And I think that's going to get people invested in the same way that Black Library books can get people to really care and really love certain factions. I think if you have this ongoing narrative where the world feels alive and lived in and not stagnant, I think it's only going to be good for the game.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't care about lore, right, then you don't have to worry about that supplement. You just, whatever. But I think for a lot of players, being immersed in that world and seeing that world come to life on the tabletop is going to be huge. You like the idea of ongoing narratives? What about it?
I just like that we won't just be like...
Could you say that in English words, maybe?
I like that we won't be like, oh, everything's awesome. And then suddenly it's like, oh, everything's not awesome.
Yeah, and maybe you have an awesome end, right? So maybe every 6 months something comes out and it starts building and little threads happen. You start by sort of tapering off from the last one. Then you build a few, build a few, build a few. And then maybe, you release a couple books, 2 or 3 books at the very end. It's like a crescendo. That'd be cool. But at least over the course of things, one of the criticisms that Kragnos gets is that he just sort of shows up.
Breaks things.
And then it goes away. Like in the lore, I mean.
Yeah.
He just sort of shows up, right? There was no Kragnos before Broken Realms Kragnos.
And then he's like...
And then after Broken Realms Kragnos, there's no more lore about him, really. Yeah. They're just like, oh, he's off doing stuff, smashing. Don't worry about it. It's like, maybe if we had some stories, maybe if we had some lore that talked about how he felt about being teleported or why he's being distracted over here, give us a little bit more reason, I think he probably would have gone over. Plus, it would have helped set up that he's got real motivations.
Oh, yeah.
He's not just a one-dimensional, I hate and smash. And it would have allowed them some opportunity to explore him and, who's the mouth of Mork?
Gobsprak.
Gobsprak, right? Because Gobsprak's supposed to be his translator, but there have been hints that Gobsprak's not translating accurately, right? So they could have led into that a little bit, and maybe they have a falling out, and so that's where that goes. And then you start building up other stuff that could then culminate in the Vermin Doom.
Yeah.
Because at least as book 6 isn't out, this could be totally wrong, but at least from the first 5 books, there seems to be very little indication that the Vermin Doom is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a little bit with the Saviors of Cinderfall. Again, I'm not going to go into any spoilers, but it's all just sort of ramping up at the end really fast, rather than having things be laid out and little red herrings here or there. And if you space things out, hopefully you'd be able to plan it so that last book comes out not... Let's assume Dawnbringer 6 leads into the Vermin Doom. Well, it would be nice for Dawnbringer 6 to lead into it, not for them to announce the Vermin Doom and then give you the book that leads up to it, right? It would be cool if we get Dawnbringer 6 and
to drop hints at Vermin Doom.
Yeah, and at the end it's like, and then Blight City shows up and you're like, oh my gosh, 4th edition, right? So like it has this crescendo, and because that's it's not exactly what happened this time. So partly I think it's a production issue. And some of that, I'm sure, is real-world factors. I'm sure Games Workshop wanted some of these books to come out sooner than they did. It's, there are things outside their control. But I think some of it is just the way they're doing it. I think the way they're doing it is not good for the story and ultimately isn't that good for the game. I think the game would be better. Those rules would get used more by more people. And there are going to be people who only like multiplayer. There are going to be people who only like these other modes. So put those modes out early. Give people reason to play this game rather than saying, oh, I would love to play multiplayer. Here's rules for 3 weeks. Well, I'm not going to buy a bunch of models and spend all that money and paint them up for 3 weeks and then have to wait 3 more years for more multiplayer rules to come out. I think building these things in over time is just a much better idea. Any final thoughts?
I think we got it now.
Yeah. All right. Tell us what you think. Have you been following Dawnbringers? How does it compare to Broken Realms? Do you like the smaller story? This has been another episode of Battle Ready.
Ready for 4th edition.
Thanks so much for watching.